everyone, today is very exciting because I am sowing a load of seeds today, and I thought I'd bring you along, show you what I'm sowing and how I'm sowing them. And if I've grown them in the past, I'll show you what they look like in my garden in previous seasons. If you're new to my channel, my name's Annette and this is Cottoverdi, and welcome. Anyway, I thought I would just get cracking with telling you what I'm sowing today. Now, the first things I'm sowing are, it's a plant called Schizanthus, which is also known as poor man's orchid. I think it's also called butterfly flower in some countries, but I grew Schizanthus for the first time last year and I absolutely fell in love. I feel like this is like something that I keep repeating in all my videos, that I fall in love with flowers, but I really do love them so much. And if something is truly beautiful, it just speaks to my heart and I feel like I have to have it in the garden. Schizanthus is an annual for us here in the UK. I live in South Buckinghamshire, which is equivalent to a zone 8A, 8B or 9A. We don't normally get below sort of -5, -10 on occasion. That's like our maximum, that's as cold as it'll ever get for us. It's an absolutely miserable day outside, by the way. It is misty and damp and disgusting. So I'm indoors today with my beautiful tulips. I did not grow these, unfortunately, but hopefully I've got lots of those to come in April and May. Anyway, Schizanthus are the most stunning, gorgeous plants. They've got this really lovely sort of delicate fern-like foliage. So the leaves are sort of airy and light and really pretty, and then the flowers really do look like orchids. Now, they come in a wide range of colours, lots of pinks and purples, a few creams and whites, occasionally an orange, and they've just got this sort of contrasting throat to them. They really do look like little orchids. I think they're so pretty, and they flowered for an incredibly long time. Now, I made notes of when I sowed them last year and when they flowered. I do this every year with everything that I'm sowing so that it helps me plan in future years. So I'll just look at my notes here for when I sowed them and when they flowered. So I sowed them in 2024, I sowed them on the 8th of February. They germinated by the 11th of February, so really fast. And then I planted them out on the 9th of May, and they were flowering on the 11th of May. I mean, in all honesty, I think I had 1 or 2 flowers whilst they were still in their seed trays. And then they were fully in flower and looking gorgeous by the 3rd of June, and they were still looking gorgeous by the 28th of June. They really do flower for quite a long time, and I imagine if you looked after them and watered them well and deadheaded them, they'd flower for longer than I managed last year. Now, I'm sowing a tiny bit later this year because I really want to push the flowering on to July, but the thing to know about Schizanthus is they do prefer cooler summers. So maybe find a spot where they're not going to get the full blast of the summer sun, and then they'll last a bit longer for you. The other thing to know about Schizanthus, poor man's orchid, is that they like a constrained root run. So they are recommended for things like patio pots, just somewhere where you can give them really rich soil, keep them well watered in free draining compost, but also if you can restrict their root run, then apparently they like that more. Now, I did have mine in patio pots last year. I didn't put them in the borders. I planted them in pots and they looked spectacular. They were the first of all my annuals to start looking fantastic, which is why I'm growing them again. I also love the colours, I love the look of the flowers, just everything about them. I'm sowing 2 different varieties today, and I really don't know what the difference is between the 2 different varieties. Last year, I only sowed the Angel Wings mix. This year, I'm also sowing Dr. Badger's mix. So we can compare and contrast, and then in future years, I'll know which one I prefer. So that's the first lot of seeds that I'm sowing. The second lot of seeds I'm sowing is called Vicaria or cow cockle, and I sowed this last year as well. But the problem I had with this last year is I didn't put them in a particularly sunny spot. So when I put the pictures up or videos on the screen, they'll look a little bit weedy, but that's my fault. It's because I didn't plant them in sun, and I do think they would do best in full sun. They are super easy to grow. So these are a hardy annual and probably should be sown in the autumn, but I didn't sow them in the autumn last year. I sowed them in the spring, and I'm doing the same this year. I mean, maybe they'd be more substantial plants if I did sow them in the autumn, but I missed all my autumn sowings for various reasons last year. So everything is being sown now. If you haven't seen vicaria before, they really are so pretty. They're like a little bit like gypsophila. So they've got these tiny little pink flowers. I'm sowing one called Pink Beauty. I don't know if it comes in other colours actually, but they've just got these tiny little delicate flowers on quite tall, strong stems. Well, they should be tall and strong, but as I said, last year I planted mine in a shadier area, which I shouldn't have done. But they probably could do with cold stratified. So if you have trouble getting yours to germinate, then that's because they need to be cold stratified. So you could sow them now and then after a week or two, put them in your fridge or a cold frame for a few weeks and then bring them back out into the warmth, and then they should germinate. But I didn't find I had that problem last year. I just sowed mine and they germinated. In fact, I made a note of those dates too. Last year I sowed them on the 7th of February. They germinated by the 11th of February, and then I planted them out on the 11th of May. I took them off the heat mats before they'd all germinated because only a few germinated and they started to get quite long and leggy. So I took them off the heat mats, and in fact I did find with vicaria that they got really big and really tall quite fast last year. So they grew faster than I was expecting. So possibly they don't even need to be sown, you know, as early as now, the beginning of February. The next thing I'm sowing are my strawflowers. Now, I didn't sow any strawflowers last year, but hopefully I could find some pictures or videos of strawflowers from my previous years of sowing them. So I have sown them in the past. I think last year I just ran out of time or ran out of space, but this year I really do want them because in case you don't know, they're very sort of papery feeling, like you can rub your finger across the petals and it sort of sounds like paper. But they're fantastic flowers. They last a really long time in arrangements, and also you can dry them and they'll stay the same color, like they'll retain the brightness of their color. So they're fantastic for drying as well. Now, because we've got a wedding celebration in our garden in July this year, I really do want strawflowers, and I'm sowing them now because I want them to be in flower in time for that celebration in the middle of July. So you don't have to sow them as early as this. You could sow them in March or even in April. You could direct sow them outside, but I want to make sure that I've got these flowers for the wedding celebration, and I think they take between 75 and 85 days to reach maturity. So from sowing to flowering, it's between 75 and 85 days. So, I mean, I could have flowers by May, but actually our last frost here, our average last frost date is towards the end of April. So I'm unlikely to have flowers in May because I probably won't plant them out until the very beginning of May. So they'll need time to grow. They grow to about 90 centimeters tall, 3 foot. So they probably won't flower until June, maybe even July, but hopefully I will have flowers in time for the wedding celebration. The strawflowers I'm sowing today are bright rose, raspberry rose, silvery rose and orange, and I've selected these colours because they're the colours that appealed to my son and daughter-in-law for their wedding celebration. So I'm hoping that these really will be in flower in time. They might need support, by the way, so because then they reach sort of 90 centimetres tall, you may find that you need to support them, and I have found that in the past, but quite often you can sort of plant them in amongst other plants in your borders and those plants will support them. And then to go along with strawflowers, I'm also sowing something called Helipterum, which is like a paper daisy. So it's very similar to strawflowers, but they just don't grow as tall. So it says on my seed packet they're going to grow to 50 centimeters tall, but they're going to be hopefully sort of something else in my border that will be quite reliable and the flowers will last a really long time. Now, Helipterum, from seed sowing to maturity is much shorter, so it's about 55 to 65 days. So by sowing them now, I could be making a mistake, so possibly I should wait till March, but I just want to get them done at the same time as the Strawflowers, because they're very similar plants. So they've got this sort of papery feel to them. They'll dry really well. They'll last a really long time as a cut flower in a vase. So I just think they're going to be super handy for the wedding celebrations. And then the last things I'm sowing today is a repeat of a plant I fell in love with last year. So I'm sowing Penstemon, and I am sowing the Twizzle series. So last year I sowed Twizzle Coral, and I absolutely love this plant. I can't tell you what a gorgeous colour it is. It really is sort of this peachy corally colour, and the flowers are so beautiful, and it flowered really, really well for me and for a long time. And Penstemons are hardy perennials, so they'll come back every single year. So I do still have them in my borders, but this year I'm also going to be sowing the Twizzle White and the Twizzle Purple, because I want all the varieties, because I think they're fantastic. The one thing I noticed was that the Twizzle Coral and the Twizzle Purple, on my seed packet it says they grow to 80 centimetres, so nearly 3 foot, but the Twizzle White, it says only 60 centimetres, so I'm not sure why it's shorter, but that one might only be 2 foot tall. I don't know. Penstemon, I found these really easy. They germinated really well for me last year. You just sow them on the surface of the soil. They'll germinate at about 20 degrees. And, you know, once they've germinated, you just grow them on for a little while before planting them outside. I won't be planting mine out until after my average last frost date. But hopefully by sowing them today, which is about the same time I did it last year, I'll have flowers at the right time and for years to come. So I'm super excited. I really hope these are successful. I am sowing one other Penstemon today, which is the chocolate drop, which I also sowed last year. But when I sowed it last year, I kind of buried it in the middle of a border, and I really didn't give it a fighting chance. You know, they were quite short seedlings when I put them in. They looked fine at the time, but then I piled a load of dahlias in front of them, and I kind of only got one stem out of all of those plants. So I'm going to sow some more and place them better this year, because I do think the chocolate drop is a really gorgeous purple colour, and they were actually quite tall, even though my seed packet says they only get to 80 centimetres. Actually, they were pretty tall. I enjoyed the height from them. They had less flowers on the stems than the Twizzle series, but that could again be due to where I planted them. So I'm going to give them a fighting chance this year and plant them in a better spot. I said that already, but I'm kind of making excuses for the pictures that I'm putting up on the screen, maybe not being an accurate representation of what they look like. I'm now going to get on with sowing all these seeds. I'll show you what I'm doing and then how I water them afterwards, and then I will take you through to the seed starting room and just show you how everything's getting on in there. To sow Schizanthus, it's recommended to sow them 12 weeks before your last frost date. If you're sowing them indoors, you can direct sow these outside if you want. Don't cover them because they need to be on the surface of the compost, but place them in darkness, so they don't need to go under grow lights or anything like that until they germinate. And once they've germinated, they do need the light. They're going to germinate best at between 15 and 22 degrees centigrade, and they should germinate in 1 to 3 weeks. As we saw from my sowings in 2024, mine germinated in 5 days. To sow vicaria, sprinkle them on the surface of the soil, cover them lightly, so just sort of 1 millimeter's depth, you know, the depth of the seed. I'm probably just going to put vermiculite on top of mine, and they will germinate at about 21 degrees in 7 to 10 days. As I said, you may need to cold stratify them. I didn't find that. The Helictrium I'm sowing today is a variety called Goliath Rose Red, and they will germinate best at between 18 and 24 degrees, and they should germinate in 14 to 21 days. So they're going to take quite a bit longer than Strawflowers to germinate. You can sow Helictrium between March and May, and they should flower for a much longer period than Strawflowers, so from May right the way through to October. The Strawflowers I'm sowing today are Bright Rose, Raspberry Rose, Silvery Rose and Orange. So when sowing the seed, don't cover them because they need light to germinate. They'll germinate best at between 22 and 24 degrees, so I am going to put them on my heat mats, and they're going to take between 7 and 15 days to germinate. So this is the seed starting room. I have put the seeds that I've sown today down here. I'm still waiting for the penstemon. They're still sitting in some water, but once they've been watered, I will be putting them on this heat mat here. So everything's on a heat mat and I cover it with a clear lid. And I do have these lights on normally. I've just turned them off for filming purposes so they don't flash. Somebody very kindly has sent me instructions on how to stop it flashing. I just haven't had time to do that. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I will get to it, I promise. Anyway, the lights are normally on. So these are all the seeds that I've sown already. I did spot this morning tiny little snapdragon seedlings. So I do have a couple of snapdragons popping up, and I only sowed those, I think, a few days ago. So that's super exciting, and everything else is doing quite well. What I do need to do is pot on my linaria because they're just a little bit too big. Let me show you. And I think I'm also going to separate some of the Ami and some of the Dorcas carota because those are there. I've got too many in each cell and I only want one. Like, they're just crowded out. Let me show you. So these are the bellis, and they've all germinated really well. I'm super happy with those. But things like the linaria, they're just too big for these little cell trays, and they've all got true leaves now. So I think it's time for me to pot these on, and I'll probably put them in maybe 4-inch, 3-inch containers, something like that. So those are fine, but there are things like the Dorcas carota that there are just too many in each cell, and so they're going to be weak and the roots are going to be fighting for nutrients. So these need to either be snipped off where I don't want one, or I'm going to have to separate them. The olea also is going to need splitting because I've got 2 in each cell, and then some of them didn't germinate. I don't know whether these just didn't get wet enough. That could be the problem there. So I'm not sure why they haven't germinated, but what I'll do is I'll just put 1 into each cell. I don't need that many olea. And then over here, this is where, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but this is where I saw one tiny seedling this morning. Here. There's just one there. So they are just starting to germinate. But that's it for today. I really hope it's been fun and interesting, and maybe you fancy sowing some of these seeds yourself. You've still got time. All of these things can be sown in the next few weeks. So, you know, pop out to a garden centre or order online and get hold of some seeds if you fancy sowing these. I particularly love sowing hardy perennials because they're not just like a one and done. You'll just have flowers for years to come. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.